Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. We are moving on to the second phone call from Mike, which is to Richard Tozier, and like Stan, everything is slowly coming back. So he remembers these bullies that used to pick on him and his friends. So this is our first mention of Henry Bowers, Belch Huggins, and Victor Criss. We know that there's a promise because Richie has to call his boss and tell him he's not going to show up to work, and his boss is being a real ass and saying you're scheduled to do an interview with someone because Richie is a DJ and like a comedian as well. And Richie is saying, well, I made a promise when I was a kid. Apparently I have to uphold my promise right now, so I am leaving. Sorry. And the Richie chapter isn't as interesting as the other phone calls to me. The third one is Ben Hanscom takes a drink. Oh, the second one was Richie Tozier takes a powder. And Ben is a promising young architect, and they mention that he is in Nebraska. Hemingford Home, which is a connection to Mother Abigail from The Stand. I love that. It's perfect. Ben goes to this bar every weekend, and it does not matter where he is in the world, what project he's working on, he always manages to come back for the weekend to hang out in this bar, and he just drinks and goes home, and the bartender has taken a shine to him because Ben talks to him, and he often leaves little gifts for the bartender's children. Ben asks for wild turkey in a beer stein, and the bartender gives it to him. And I've never actually had wild turkey, but I am a whiskey person, so maybe I should try it. Something about Ben, and it's not just the connection to Hemingford Home, but he reminds me of Stu Redman. That's just how I picture him in my head. He could be the same person. And I love Stu, love Ben. Could be one of the reasons why Ben is one of my favorites. And Ben has gotten a phone call from Mike, and he's talking to Ricky Lee about it, and he was saying that he didn't remember anything about his childhood. He just didn't until now. And what a weird feeling that would be. Quote, what scared me was getting about halfway over here and realizing that it wasn't just Mike I'd forgotten about. I'd forgotten everything about being a kid. Page 76. So his memories are coming back, and he remembers that they used a silver dollar in a way that he doesn't tell us, but he ends up giving the other 3 to Ricky Lee to give to his children. And I'm thinking, you remember why you had this and what it was used for, and you're likely to need it again, and you gave it away. Idiot. I also really like that Ben says, quote, you pay for what you get, you own what you pay for, and sooner or later, whatever you own comes back home to you. Page 78. Now that's some Judd Crandall shit right there. Phone call number 4. Eddie Kasprek takes his medicine. Now, Eddie is married to Myra. He is in the process of moving his entire medicine cabinet contents into a travel bag because he has to bring everything with him. He is a hypochondriac. His mother made him that way. He had a terribly overbearing mother. I hate her. I hate her so much. He, in some ways, ended up marrying a woman like his mother. They're both overweight. They're both overbearing, kind of wanting to take care of Eddie to the point of smothering him, but at least his wife is... Her tendencies seem to come from a place of love. His mother, I don't know. She was a lot. So Eddie was tricked into believing he had asthma by his mom, and when Mike calls and his memories start coming back, his asthma also starts coming back. His asthma, which he hadn't experienced in years, is coming back. So that's an interesting thing. Phone call number 5, Beverly Rogan takes a whooping, and this one has always been hard for me. Beverly Marsh, that was her maiden name. Marsh was her maiden name. She has married a man named Tom Rogan. He is a real jerk, easy to despise, quite one-dimensional. Quote, Tom Rogan knew 2 things about Beverly Marsh almost at once. She was desirable and she was vulnerable. In less than a month, he knew a third as well. She was talented, very talented. Pages 99 through 100. So Tom is just domineering. He wants everything his way. He squeezes her talent and profits from it. He is her business manager or partner or something, like a Svengali almost. And one of the defining moments of the relationship was when he decided that she shouldn't smoke anymore. So he breaks her of this habit by beating her up. He slaps her a few times in a car. She could have chosen to walk away, but she didn't. She is often beaten by Tom. He mentions that he uses a belt on her. He does it often. Quote, "The belt made thick bullwhip cracks in the quiet room, but she did not scream as she sometimes did, and she did not beg him to stop as she usually did. Worst of all, she did not cry as she always did." Page 111. So this is a common thing for them, a common way for him to deal with what he doesn't appreciate behavior-wise from Beverly, and she usually takes it, submits to it, changes her behavior, or forgets, and then just the cycle continues, and she has never broken it until tonight. She is determined to uphold her promise, and she has this big fight with Tom. He's overweight, he's kind of taken off guard because she doesn't usually fight back, but she completely wins this fight. She beats the shit out of him with his own belt, and she takes off. Final phone call. Bill Denbrough takes time out. So Bill is over in England with his wife Audra, who's an actress. He met her and they fell in love. She was starring in a movie that he was adapting the screenplay from one of his works into this movie. She was cast. They instantly fell in love. She was kind of having a troubled go of it. A lot of drugs, a lot of partying, that kind of behavior. Bill writes a short story, and it's basically the story of Georgie and the monster in the cellar, even though he has not thought of Georgie in forever, not until Mike calls him, and then he remembers his brother, and he tells Audra, "Hey, remember I have a brother who died young, and I never really told you anything about it other than the fact that I had a brother, and he died? Well, he was murdered." And then he goes into this whole thing, and Audra's like, "What? How do you not remember that?" And he says, quote, "You see, it never occurred to me to tell you about George." Page 129. And then later he says, quote, "I haven't thought of Derry itself in 20 years. So this amnesia that affects all of these people who have escaped the bounds of Derry, Maine, it's fascinating. It's just fascinating to me. Bill has his stutter, and that has started to come back while he's talking to Audra, explaining why he has to leave England and go to Derry, Maine. And she wants to come along. He's like, no, you can't. It's dangerous. You will stay here." Which we know that's going to come into it. Derry, the first interlude. So we have here excerpts from Mike Hanlon's diary, which is called Derry, an Unauthorized Town History. It's very interesting because he is the librarian. He has been doing research on Derry. He has remained in Derry his entire life, so he has not forgotten like his friends have. All of the kids who moved away and grew up forgot about it, forgot about Derry, forgot about their childhood, and they've all become super successful in something that we don't know yet, but they've mentioned it in a few ways. None of these adults have had children. One of the interesting parts of this is the definition of haunt as a noun, a feeding place for animals. Mike brings that up, and he is kind of creeped out because Derry has become a haunt. So Mike has been debating whether or not he should call his friends. If Mike calls and he asks them to uphold their promise, they will, or in the case of Stan, he won't, but they might. Mike has this feeling that if he's wrong, people might die. Stan obviously died. These excerpts from the town history are so interesting. I think it would make a good book on its own. Just the history of Derry, Maine. I would love it. We find out that Adrian Mellon's death and the death of two children, one which occurred on the same day as Georgie's death, but 27 years later, these are all signs that it is coming back. So there are cycles, and it has been around in 1876 and 1877, 1904, 1905, 1906, 1929 and 1930, 1957 and 1958. So those were the dates of when they were kids, the 1957, 58. We also find out that the original Derry colonists disappeared, a la the Roanoke colonists, in 1741. And there have been crazy amounts of child disappearances. In 1930, there were 170 children that disappeared in Derry. In 1958, there were 127. There are all these unexplainable, really bizarre things that the old-timers are aware of. They don't like to talk about it. In 1906, there was an Easter Sunday egg hunt. 102 people died in an explosion in the ironworks factory. It was never explained. 88 of those were kids, by the way. So the death of children seems to be a big part of these cycles. Oh, there's just too much to talk about. There's too much to talk about. Have a spooky day.